Have you ever come across a passage in the Bible that made you stop, reflect, and shiver at the sheer mystery and strangeness of a particular death? The most peculiar deaths in the Bible not only guide us through unexpected narratives, but also reveal profound lessons about faith, arrogance, and divine will. Whether it's those who dared to challenge God's authority or those who suffered tragic fates due to defiance and pride, every story carries a meaningful lesson. Join me in uncovering the 15 strangest deaths in the Bible, stories that will not only captivate your curiosity, but also challenge the way you see life. If this video was helpful, don't forget to hit the like button. YouTube's algorithm rewards videos with high engagement, so by liking it, you're helping this content reach a wider audience. Thank you so much for your support. First up, the story of King Josiah. As recorded in 2 Kings 22-23 and 2 Chronicles 34-35, King Josiah's reign is a powerful example of devotion, religious transformation, and an unexpectedly tragic ending. He became king at just 8 years old, inheriting a kingdom steeped in idol worship. However, at 16, he turned his heart to God, and by the age of 20, he initiated major reforms, dismantling idols and eradicating pagan worship. A turning point in his rule occurred when the Book of the Law, likely the Book of Deuteronomy, was discovered during temple restoration. Upon hearing its words, Josiah tore his robes in sorrow and led Judah into a spiritual awakening, reinstating the Passover festival and guiding Israel back to monotheistic worship. The Bible honors Josiah, stating, "Neither before nor after him was there a king who turned to the Lord with all his heart, soul, and strength, in keeping with the law of Moses." 2 Kings 23-25. However, Josiah's story takes a tragic turn. At the age of 39, he involved himself in a battle between Egypt and Assyria, despite Pharaoh Necho's warning that God was not on his side. Disregarding this warning, Josiah went into battle in disguise but was fatally struck by Egyptian archers and died shortly after. His story offers profound lessons. Josiah's life illustrates how unwavering faith in God can transform an entire nation, showing the power of divine teachings when the Book of the Law ignited a revival. Yet his death is a sobering reminder that even the most righteous are not exempt from the consequences of decisions made without seeking God's guidance. His failure to heed Pharaoh Necho's warning emphasizes the importance of seeking and obeying God's direction in all actions. Though his life was cut short, Josiah's influence endures. He remains one of Judah's most revered kings, demonstrating that a life devoted to God carries lasting significance for future generations. Coming up next, the story of Samson. The story of Samson, recorded in Judges 13-16, is one of the most gripping and profound accounts in the Old Testament, showcasing supernatural strength, intense passion, and ultimate redemption. As a Nazirite from birth, Samson was divinely chosen to deliver Israel from Philistine oppression. His immense strength, enabling him to tear apart a lion with his bare hands or defeat 1,000 warriors using a donkey's jawbone, was a testament to his special relationship with God. However, Samson's life was filled with reckless choices, often influenced by uncontrolled desire, particularly for Philistine women. Among them, Delilah played the most fateful role. Bribed by the Philistines, she betrayed him by exploiting his trust to discover the secret of his strength, his uncut hair, the sign of his Nazirite vow. Once she cut his hair while he slept. Samson lost his power, was captured, blinded, and enslaved. But the story does not end there. During his imprisonment, his hair began to grow back, symbolizing the restoration of his strength and his renewed bond with God. Humbled by his suffering, Samson finally learned to put his trust in God rather than in himself. The climax occurs during a grand celebration at the temple of Dagon, the Philistine deity, where Samson was put on display for entertainment. In a final prayer, he cried out, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please give me strength just once more so that I may take revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Judges 16:28. Empowered once again, Samson pushed against the temple pillars, bringing the structure down and killing himself along with thousands of Philistines, more than he had ever slain in his lifetime. Samson's death is both tragic and heroic, demonstrating that even in human failure, God can still fulfill his divine plan. A biblical scholar once wrote, "Samson's story reminds us that God can use even our weaknesses and mistakes to accomplish his greater purpose." Samson was a complex figure, both strong and vulnerable, both a hero and a sinner. His story highlights that true strength lies not in physical might, but in faith and obedience to God. His final act was not just vengeance, but also redemption, as he sacrificed himself to fulfill the mission that had been destined for him since birth. If you were in Samson's place in that final moment, would you be willing to give up everything to fulfill your mission? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Story number 3, King Saul. The story of King Saul, the first king of Israel, is a tragic account of spiritual decline, disobedience, and the devastating consequences of turning away from God. Found in 1 Samuel 28-31, Saul's downfall serves as a powerful warning against seeking strength in the wrong places when faced with despair. Saul began his reign with humility and divine favor, chosen to lead Israel. However, over time, he became arrogant and disobedient to God's commands. This disobedience led to God rejecting him as king and transferring his blessing to David. Consumed by jealousy and paranoia, Saul spiraled into deep turmoil. Near the end of his reign, Saul faced a major threat from the Philistines. In a state of panic and despair, he sought guidance from God, but no answer came. Whether through dreams, prophets, or even Urim and Thummim. Driven to desperation, Saul did what he had previously outlawed in Israel. He sought the services of a medium in Endor to summon the spirit of the deceased prophet Samuel. This marked the pinnacle of Saul's downfall. The medium summoned Samuel, or a figure resembling him, and Saul received a harsh message. Samuel rebuked him for calling upon the dead and reaffirmed that God had abandoned him. He foretold that Saul and his sons would die in battle the following day, and that the kingdom would be given to David. Samuel's prophecy came to pass exactly as he had spoken. In the battle against the Philistines, Saul's sons, including the faithful and brave Jonathan, were killed. Wounded and unwilling to be captured and humiliated by his enemies, Saul took his own life by falling on his sword when his armor-bearer refused to do it for him. Saul's death was a layered tragedy. He lost not only his life, but also his kingdom, leaving behind a legacy of disobedience and spiritual ruin. One scholar commented, "Saul's story serves as a sobering reminder that true devotion to God cannot be replaced, and seeking guidance from forbidden sources leads only to destruction." Saul's journey from a humble king chosen by God to a man who died in despair teaches a profound lesson about the dangers of pride, defiance, and the refusal to seek redemption. It serves as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, turning back to God in sincere repentance is the only path to hope and salvation. The rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. The story, recorded in Numbers 16, stands as one of the most dramatic episodes in the Old Testament, vividly depicting the severe consequences of rebelling against God's ordained authority. It is a tale not only of defiance, but also of divine holiness, righteousness, and sovereign power. Korah, a Levite and cousin of Moses and Aaron, conspired with Dathan and Abiram of the tribe of Reuben, along with 250 prominent leaders of Israel, to challenge Moses and Aaron's leadership. They argued that Moses and Aaron had unjustly elevated themselves above the people, claiming that the entire Israelite community was holy and that no one had the right to wield exclusive authority. Their rebellion was not merely against human leadership, but against God's divine order. To settle the dispute, Moses proposed a test to reveal whom God had truly chosen. The rebels were instructed to present incense offerings before the Lord. On the appointed day, as they gathered at the tent of meeting, the presence of God appeared, signaling imminent judgment. Showing mercy, Moses pleaded with God not to destroy the entire assembly for the actions of a few. God granted his request and commanded the people to move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Then, a terrifying event took place. The ground beneath the rebels split open, swallowing them, their families, and all their belongings. They descended alive into Sheol, the realm of the dead. Simultaneously, fire from God consumed the 250 men who had offered incense, an undeniable display of divine judgment. This story imparts deep lessons. First, it emphasizes that opposing leaders appointed by God is not merely an act of defiance against human authority, but a direct act of disrespect toward God. A scholar stated, Korah's rebellion is a powerful warning that divine authority cannot be contested by personal ambition. Secondly, the judgment of the rebels highlights the necessity of fearing God and following divine laws. The earth splitting open and the consuming fire are vivid depictions of the consequences of disobedience and irreverence. The story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram is not just an episode in Israel's history, but a lasting warning. It teaches that arrogance, personal ambition, and rebellion against divine principles lead to severe consequences, while humility and faithfulness form the foundation of a lasting relationship with God. Number 5. The story of Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli the priest, is a tragic example of power abuse, corruption in the priesthood, and the grave consequences of dishonoring God. Found in 1 Samuel chapters 2-4, this story serves as a strong reminder of spiritual accountability and the inescapable judgment on those who disobey. Eli, Israel's high priest, appointed his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, as priests. However, the Bible describes them as wicked men who did not recognize the Lord, 1 Samuel 2:12. They abused their authority, desecrating their sacred role and undermining the Israelites' faith. Hophni and Phinehas violated sacrificial laws by taking more meat from the offerings than allowed, even using threats to get what they wanted. This act was not only theft from God, but also weakened people's trust and devotion in worship. Moreover, they engaged in immoral acts with women serving at the entrance of the tabernacle, defiling the holy place and disgracing their priestly duties. Eli knew about their actions and rebuked them, but he failed to take strong action to stop them. His reluctance made him partially responsible for their corruption and led to his family's downfall. God, through a prophet, pronounced severe judgment. Both Hophni and Phinehas would die on the same day, and Eli's priestly lineage would end. Eli, Israel's high priest, appointed his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, as priests. However, the Bible describes them as wicked men who did not recognize the Lord, 1 Samuel 2:12. They abused their authority, desecrating their sacred role and undermining the Israelites' faith. The story concludes in tragedy, but its lesson is clear. The misuse of power, irreverence toward God, and failure in spiritual leadership lead to personal ruin and harm to the entire community. A scholar remarked, "The story of Hophni and Phinehas is a warning that disobedience in sacred duties not only offends God, but also undermines the faith and unity of his people." Eli's family's downfall illustrates that no person, no matter how highly positioned, is immune to God's fair judgment. It also serves as a reminder that power must always be exercised with responsibility, especially in spiritual and religious matters. Number 6. The story of Jezebel, the fierce and power-hungry queen of Israel, is a testament to the dangers of tyranny and the certainty of divine judgment. As recorded in 1st and 2nd Kings, Jezebel is one of the most infamous figures in the Old Testament, remembered both for her ruthless deeds and the grim punishment she faced. Jezebel, originally a Phoenician princess, married King Ahab and introduced Baal worship into Israel. However, she did not stop at personal belief. She enforced Baal worship upon the nation. She ordered the persecution of God's prophets, leading to many executions, and actively sought to eradicate the worship of the Lord from Israel. One of Jezebel's most wicked acts was the murder of Naboth, an innocent vineyard owner whose land lay near Ahab's palace. When Ahab failed to persuade Naboth to sell the land, Jezebel devised a sinister plan. She falsely accused Naboth of blasphemy, resulting in his execution. Afterward, she showed no remorse, gifting the vineyard to Ahab. God, angered by Jezebel's sins, sent the prophet Elijah with a dire prophecy. "Dogs will devour Jezebel in Jezreel, and her blood will be licked by dogs." 1 Kings 21:23. This was not just a forewarning, but a sentence that could not be overturned. Years later, when Jehu, the general appointed by God to end Ahab's lineage, reached Jezreel, Jezebel stood defiant. She adorned herself and looked out from her palace window, confronting Jehu. Yet Jehu remained unmoved. He ordered her attendants to throw her down. Her body hit the ground and was trampled by horses, and when Jehu's men came to bury her, they found only her skull, feet, and hands. Dogs had devoured the rest, just as foretold. Jezebel's end remains one of the most striking deaths in the Bible. It is a demonstration of God's power and his unwavering justice in dealing with corruption. A scholar once noted, Jezebel embodies the dangers of unchecked ambition, arrogance, and defiance of God, and her fate serves as an eternal warning that no one is beyond divine judgment. From a position of great authority to a tragic end, Jezebel's story conveys a universal lesson. Those who misuse power and stand against God will inevitably face consequences. Her legacy continues to serve as a reminder of divine justice and the importance of respecting God's authority. Number 7. The story of Absalom, the son of King David, is a dramatic tale of betrayal, ambition, and pride. Found primarily in 2 Samuel chapters 13 to 18, Absalom was famed for his unmatched beauty and thick, flowing hair. However, his story is not just one of personal downfall, but also a moral lesson on the perils of arrogance and disloyalty. Absalom was an affectionate but impulsive brother. After his sister Tamar was assaulted by their half-brother Amnon, Absalom harbored deep resentment and plotted his revenge. 2 years later, he killed Amnon and fled, living in exile for 3 years. Although eventually allowed to return and reconcile with his father, Absalom's ambitions only grew stronger. He began plotting against David, using charm and deception to win the favor of the people. Absalom instigated a rebellion, forcing King David to abandon Jerusalem. The civil war that followed fractured the kingdom and inflicted suffering upon its people. However, Absalom's fate was sealed during the battle in the forest of Ephraim. In a cruel irony, his long, flowing hair, once a symbol of his vanity, became the cause of his downfall. As he rode his mule through the forest, His hair got tangled in the branches of a mighty oak, leaving him suspended between earth and sky. Unable to escape, he became an easy target. And Absalom's tragic death carries an important lesson. The very hair he once took pride in became the cause of his demise. One scholar remarked, "Absalom's story warns us that pride and vanity can lead not only to one's downfall, but also to the suffering of many others." Joab, King David's trusted general, disregarded the king's command to spare Absalom and took advantage of the situation. Along with his men, he struck Absalom down, bringing an end to the rebellion but leaving King David in unbearable grief. In his sorrow, David cried out, "O my son, Absalom! My son, Absalom." 2 Samuel 18:33. His lamentation reflected the pain of a father mourning his son, no matter his wrongdoings. Absalom's story is not just about arrogance and betrayal. It is also a cautionary tale about the consequences of unwise choices. It reminds us that unchecked ambition and complacency do not lead to lasting success, while humility and loyalty serve as the true foundations of a meaningful life. The brief mention of Judah's firstborn, in Genesis 38:7, remains one of the Old Testament's most mysterious accounts. The Bible states, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord put him to death. Yet his specific wrongdoing is never revealed, making his story a subject of much speculation. As the eldest son of Judah, a descendant of Jacob, and a forefather in the line leading to Jesus Christ, was expected to carry forward a significant legacy. However, his actions, though undisclosed, were grave enough for God to take his life without delay. The ambiguity surrounding sin has led to multiple interpretations over time. Some scholars suggest he may have engaged in pagan rituals, a common practice among the Canaanites. Others theorize that he was unjust, cruel, or engaged in immoral acts. Whatever the case, his deeds violated God's divine standards, rendering him unworthy of his role. Punishment serves as a warning about the responsibilities that come with privilege. As the firstborn, he bore both familial and spiritual duties. His failure affected not only his fate, but also the future of Judah's lineage. Story teaches that God's judgment is not limited to actions alone, but extends to a person's heart and intentions. A scholar observed, the lack of details in story does not diminish its significance. Instead, it emphasizes that God sees what is hidden from human eyes. His story reminds us that status and power do not provide immunity, but rather come with great responsibility. The fate of reveals that moral failure and irresponsibility can disrupt divine plans, not just personal lives. His story underscores the importance of faithfulness and adherence to God's ethical standards. Number 9. The fate of Herod Agrippa. Acts 12:20-23 provides a dramatic example of how arrogance and self-glorification can lead to destruction. Herod Agrippa I, a ruler appointed by Rome, wielded significant power over Judea. However, his excessive pride would soon seal his tragic destiny. The story describes how Herod found himself in conflict with the people of Tyre and Sidon, who depended on his region for food. To restore peace, they sent envoys to seek his favor. During a grand public gathering, Herod, dressed in a robe that shimmered like silver, took his seat on the throne and delivered a speech. Overwhelmed by his appearance and words, the crowd began chanting, "This is the voice of a god, not a mere mortal." Rather than deflecting the praise and acknowledging God's sovereignty, Herod basked in the flattery. His failure to honor God triggered immediate judgment. An angel of the Lord struck him down, and before the horrified onlookers, He suffered an excruciating death, his body consumed by worms. Herod's story serves as a chilling reminder that human pride has limits, and divine glory is not to be taken lightly. The narrative underscores a timeless truth: all power and honor belong to God alone. As one theologian noted, Herod's demise illustrates that arrogance, particularly when it involves taking credit for God's glory, leads to catastrophic consequences. Beyond a warning against arrogance, this event highlights the importance of humility and submission. The fate of Herod Agrippa. I was not just a personal judgment, but a public declaration that God alone is sovereign, and his glory is untouchable. Number 10. Uzzah's tragic mistake. Found in 2 Samuel 6 and 1 Chronicles 13, the account of Uzzah is both controversial and deeply symbolic. It unfolds during a time of great rejoicing as King David sought to bring the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred emblem of God's presence, back to Jerusalem. Yet in the midst of this celebration, an impulsive act led to Uzzah's untimely death, teaching a profound lesson on reverence and divine authority. As the ark was transported on a newly built cart drawn by oxen, Uzzah and his brother Ahio walked beside it. The procession was joyous until the oxen stumbled, causing the ark to shift. Reacting instinctively, Uzzah reached out to steady it. What seemed like an innocent gesture resulted in his immediate death as God's wrath struck him down. 2 Samuel 6:7. At first glance, Uzzah's punishment might seem extreme. After all, his action was motivated by concern for the ark's safety. However, God had provided clear and unchangeable instructions. The ark was to be carried by Levites using poles, and no one was allowed to touch it, except for specially designated priests. These were not just ceremonial rules, but reflections of God's holiness and the necessity of obedience. Uzzah's well-meaning reaction, though instinctive, disregarded God's divine order. By touching the ark, he suggested that human intervention was required to protect something that was already under God's sovereign care. A biblical scholar noted, Uzzah's story teaches that God's commands are not to be adjusted based on human logic. His holiness is absolute, and our obedience must reflect that truth. This story delivers a compelling message about respect and obedience. It serves as a reminder that having good intentions does not justify disobedience, and that God, in his infinite holiness, does not require human intervention for his protection. Just as the Israelites were warned, we too must recognize that God's presence is sacred and must not be taken lightly. Uzzah's tragic fate is not just a historical event, but a timeless lesson about fearing the Lord and the importance of following his divine instructions with unwavering faith. Story number 11, Ananias and Sapphira. The story of Ananias and Sapphira, found in Acts 5, stands as a sobering warning about the consequences of deceit and hypocrisy within the Christian community. It took place in the formative days of the church, when believers lived in unity, sharing their possessions to support one another. Many, out of faith and generosity, voluntarily sold their land and donated all the proceeds to the apostles to ensure no one was in need. Ananias and Sapphira, a husband and wife, also sold a piece of land, but secretly withheld part of the money while pretending to have given everything. Their goal was to appear more generous and devoted than they actually were. When Ananias presented the money, the Apostle Peter, through divine insight, confronted him. He emphasized that Ananias's wrongdoing was not in keeping some of the money, but in deceiving both people and God. "You have not lied to human beings but to God," Peter declared. Instantly, Ananias collapsed and died. A few hours later, unaware of what had happened to her husband, Sapphira entered. When Peter questioned her about the money, she repeated the lie. Peter then rebuked her, saying, "How could you conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord?" The moment he finished speaking, Sapphira also fell dead. They were buried together, and the entire Christian community was struck with fear. This harsh punishment highlighted not only the severe consequences of lying, but also how hypocrisy endangers the unity and holiness of the Church. God does not judge only by outward appearances. He looks at the heart. A theologian once said, "The story of Ananias and Sapphira teaches us that deceit and hypocrisy can destroy trust and hinder the presence of God in a faith community." This account is not just a historical lesson, but a relevant warning for believers today. It reminds us that honesty and integrity are essential to a strong spiritual community. Ananias and Sapphira did not merely deceive humans, they attempted to deceive God Himself, which led to immediate and irreversible judgment. Their story warns that self-serving ambition and insincerity must never weaken the sacred unity of God's people. Story number 12, The Sin of Achan. Found in Joshua 7, the story of Achan is a powerful account of greed and the severe consequences of disobedience. During the conquest of the Promised Land, Joshua led Israel to a miraculous victory at Jericho. God had commanded that all treasures of the city be set apart for Him, some to be destroyed, and the rest dedicated to His treasury. However, amidst this triumph, an act of defiance brought disaster upon the entire nation. Achan, from the tribe of Judah, was overtaken by greed. He secretly stole a fine Babylonian robe, 200 shekels of silver, and a 50-shekel gold bar, hiding them in his tent. He assumed his actions would remain unnoticed. However, the consequences of his transgression soon became clear. When Israel attempted to capture the small city of Ai, they suffered a humiliating defeat, losing 36 men. This loss was not just a military failure. It was a sign of spiritual corruption within the nation. Following an unexpected defeat, Joshua turned to God for answers and was told that sin had infiltrated the people. Through investigation, Achan was found to be the guilty one. His punishment was severe. He and his family were taken to the valley of Achor, where they were stoned and burned along with all their belongings. This harsh punishment carried deep significance. It demonstrated the severity of breaking God's covenant. Achan's sin was not merely stealing. It was a betrayal of God's command and a contamination of the holy community. A scholar noted, personal sin in Israel's covenant was never an isolated event. It could disrupt the spiritual connection of the entire community with God. Moreover, Achan's actions illustrate how greed can lead to destruction, both personally and collectively. He prioritized personal wealth over obedience to God, disregarding divine instructions. His punishment was not only to hold him accountable, but also to serve as a warning to the Israelites that holiness and faithfulness to God must not be compromised. The story of Achan is more than just a historical lesson. It is a timeless warning. It teaches that every action has consequences and that disregarding sacred values can lead to ruin. The Valley of Achor, initially a place of judgment, later became a symbol of redemption and hope, Hosea 2:15, highlighting that no matter how severe the sin, true repentance can lead to salvation. The story of Nadab and Abihu. The account of Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, recorded in Leviticus 10, serves as a serious warning about disobedience and irreverence toward God's holiness. These two priests were privileged to serve in the tabernacle, where God's presence dwelled. However, their reckless actions led to one of the most striking judgments in Scripture. On one occasion, Nadab and Abihu offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, an act that went against the precise regulations God had given. Immediately, fire from the Lord consumed them, and they died in his presence. Leviticus 10:2. The unauthorized fire was not just an incorrect ritual, but symbolized their arrogance and disregard for God's will. The deeper reason for their downfall becomes clearer in context. God had established specific guidelines for how priests were to offer incense, including using fire from the sacred altar. Their use of strange fire displayed disregard for these divine rules, violating the holiness of worship. Moreover, shortly after their deaths, God commanded priests not to consume alcohol before entering the tent of meeting, Leviticus 10:9, leading many scholars to believe that Nadab and Abihu may have been intoxicated when they committed their fatal act. The severity of their punishment reflected more than just their personal mistake. It underscored the immense responsibility of the priesthood. As spiritual leaders, they were expected to uphold the highest standards of reverence and obedience. Their failure was not just personal, it had the potential to lead the entire nation astray. Their story is a clear reminder that God's holiness must be treated with the utmost respect. He expects those who serve him to do so with devotion and reverence. As one theologian stated, the lesson of Nadab and Abihu is that holiness is not just a trait of God, it is a requirement for all who serve him. This story is not limited to ancient history, but continues to resonate today, reminding us of the importance of obedience and reverence for divine principles, especially for those in spiritual leadership roles. Number 14, the story of Lot's wife, found in Genesis 19, is one of the most fascinating and symbolically rich narratives in the Old Testament. Against the backdrop of the catastrophic destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, this story goes beyond a historical account and imparts powerful lessons on faith, obedience, and the necessity of leaving the past behind. Lot, Abraham's nephew, resided in Sodom with his family. When God resolved to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah due to their overwhelming corruption, he sent angels to warn Lot. His family was instructed to leave immediately and escape to the mountains, with one strict condition: they must not look back. Though seemingly simple, this command carried deep spiritual significance about trust and detachment. While Lot and his daughters obeyed, his wife did not. As they fled, she turned back to look at the city engulfed in flames and was instantly turned into a pillar of salt, a shocking and severe punishment. This has sparked centuries of debate among scholars about the true meaning behind her act and its repercussions. Looking back may appear as a small action, but it symbolized a heart still bound to the past. Sodom was not only a city of sin, but also a place filled with Lot's wife's memories, possessions, and connections. Her backward glance revealed hesitation, a struggle between her attachment to her past and the call to move forward into God's plan. It was an indication of a divided heart. The punishment of turning into a pillar of salt is highly symbolic. In ancient traditions, salt represented preservation, purification, and sometimes even a curse. Her transformation into salt can be interpreted as a lasting warning about the dangers of an unwillingness to let go. Salt, often linked with barrenness, may also signify that her refusal to leave the past behind resulted in eternal stagnation. The story of Lot's wife is more than just an ancient tale. It speaks to modern believers as well. This story reminds us that true obedience to God requires full commitment and a heart free from attachment to the past. Jesus himself referenced this story, warning his disciples in Luke 17:32, "Remember Lot's wife," urging them to focus forward rather than lingering on what was left behind. This story teaches that an attachment to the past, especially one marked by sin, can prevent us from stepping into the new blessings that God has prepared. It is a striking reminder that in order to move forward, we must fully leave behind what holds us back, both physically and spiritually. Number 15, the story of Onan. Found in Genesis 38, this story presents a compelling and controversial chapter filled with moral and spiritual lessons. Onan, the son of Judah, was part of an important lineage in Israel. After his brother passed away, Judah instructed Onan to observe the custom of levirate marriage, a practice designed to protect widows and ensure the continuity of the family bloodline. Under this tradition, Onan was to marry Tamar, Er's widow, and provide a son who would be recognized as the rightful heir of his deceased brother. Initially, Onan appeared to comply with this duty. However, upon realizing that any child born from Tamar would not bear his name, his selfish motives took over. He was unwilling to share his inheritance or see his lineage credited to another. With this in mind, Onan deliberately deceived. Each time he was with Tamar, he spilled his seed on the ground, preventing conception. This was not just an act of irresponsibility, but also a profound betrayal toward his father, his late brother, and Tamar. Onan's actions hold deep symbolic meaning. On one level, they represent defiance against a sacred tradition meant to uphold unity and duty within the family. On another, they show blatant disregard for Tamar's dignity, reducing her to an instrument of personal gratification while denying her the right to motherhood. His selfishness not only violated social norms, but also directly defied the will of God. But his defiance did not go unnoticed. God, who demands justice and loyalty from his people, was angered by Onan's deception. As a result, Onan faced a swift and severe punishment. He was struck down and died. His fate serves as a warning that deceit and selfishness have dire consequences. At its core, Onan's story is not merely about neglecting responsibility. It is a broader lesson about the dangers of self-interest and rejecting divine commandments. As one biblical scholar observed, Onan's sin was more than a refusal to fulfill his duty. It was a betrayal of the sacred principles of commitment, both familial and spiritual. His tragic fate remains a powerful reminder of the values of loyalty, responsibility, and faith. Tamar, the woman caught in this ordeal, is also an essential figure in the story. She was not only a victim of Onan's betrayal, but also a symbol of perseverance and justice. Eventually, Tamar took matters into her own hands to secure her rightful place in Judah's lineage, a story filled with dramatic twists and unexpected outcomes. The account of Onan serves as a lesson not only on responsibility, but also on the undeniable consequences of human actions. In the Bible, Onan's death is a testament to the reality that no act of defiance, no matter how hidden, escapes God's judgment. This powerful narrative continues to provide wisdom, urging reflection on accountability and faithfulness in all aspects of life. The Bible's stories of profound and meaningful deaths are not just historical records. They offer valuable lessons about faith, loyalty, and the consequences of disobedience. From Herod Agrippa's arrogance to Samson's redemption and King Josiah's tragic yet devoted life, each story showcases God's unwavering justice while calling humanity to humility and righteousness. These lessons are still relevant today, reminding us that our choices shape not only our own lives, but also those around us. Let these stories inspire you to walk a path of faith, truth, and integrity. If you found this message meaningful, consider sharing it with others. Help spread the wisdom of the Bible and encourage others in their faith journey. Thank you for reading. May you always live with faith and peace in your heart.